Hey, sleepwalker, maybe bring a pillow next time. One soldier laughed as the others smirked at Mara Kessler sitting cross-legged in the dirt. She didn't argue, just breathed steadily, her calm silence only fueling their contempt. To them, she was a joke, a failure waiting for discharge. For 2 weeks, she seemed useless, sleeping through drills, mocked by her squad, nearly dismissed. But then a Navy SEAL commander stepped onto the field. He didn't ask questions. He just shouted one single order. And in that instant, the woman they called lazy transformed before their eyes. Calm became lethal, silence became precision, and suddenly every man who mocked her realized they were standing beside someone far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The desert heat had a way of stripping illusions from people. By the time Mara Kessler stepped off the transport truck at 0530 hours, the air already carried the sting of dust and diesel, settling on the tongue like sandpaper. The training yard was alive with movement. Soldiers jogging in formation, instructors barking orders, the metallic clatter of rifles being checked and rechecked. To the untrained eye, Mara blended in, just another body in desert camouflage, boots caked with dust. But within hours, it was clear she was different. While her peers charged through obstacles, scaling walls and crawling through sand, Mara sat cross-legged at the base of the course. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath, and seemed to drift somewhere else entirely. To outsiders, it looked like laziness. To her squad, it looked like betrayal. Training was sacred. No one could afford a weak link. Lieutenant Dane Coulter, with his sharp jaw and sharper tongue, took it upon himself to make sure everyone noticed. He was the kind of officer who carried himself like a billboard, always polished, always loud, always convinced his voice was the one that mattered. "Look at her," he scoffed during chow, pitching his voice loud enough for the entire table. "Sleeping Beauty strikes again. Maybe she thinks the enemy will wait while she takes a nap." The laughter from Hughes and Ramirez was quick, automatic, the kind of laughter that wasn't just about humor, but about confirming a pecking order. O'Neill tried to smile along, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Mara said nothing. She carried her tray to a far corner of the mess hall, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. Silence had become her armor, and she wore it well. Yet the silence only fueled the contempt. In a culture where loudness and aggression often masqueraded as strength, her refusal to explain herself was interpreted as arrogance, or worse, weakness. 2 days into training, the pattern repeated itself. At the rifle range, when the line erupted with the crack of live rounds, Mara raised her weapon, sighted downrange, and then lowered it. Not one shot fired. The instructor stormed over, clipboard in hand, veins rising in his neck. "You planning on joining us today, Kessler, or are you just sightseeing?" Mara responded evenly, "Shooting, Sergeant." But she didn't. She stood there, still as stone, while the rest of the line pounded targets into Swiss cheese. When the ceasefire whistle blew, her target was untouched. It was a clean sheet of paper in a world that measured worth by holes punched through silhouettes. By the end of the first week, the whispers had grown into open hostility. Her squad mates didn't just see her as dead weight, they saw her as a liability. Dane Coulter leaned into that narrative, voicing what others wouldn't. "She's not cut out for this. She's a discharge waiting to happen." The men nodded and the judgment became gospel. But here is where the story of Mara Kessler becomes more than a military anecdote. This is where it touches something deeper, something about us. In the military, as in life, silence is often mistaken for weakness. A quiet soldier is called aloof. A worker who doesn't argue is seen as unambitious. A student who stays silent is labeled disengaged. We confuse loudness with strength, forgetting that real power doesn't always shout. Mara's silence was discipline, but others saw defiance. Her refusal to act on their terms became her crime. Coulter and his squad laughed because mockery is easier than curiosity. In their eyes, every soldier had to fight, sweat, and shout in unison. Anything less was betrayal. And beyond the military, the same pattern exists. We mock the quiet coworker, the distant neighbor, the different classmate, rarely asking what story lies behind their silence. As the days wore on, Mara's silence became heavier. Every drill, every formation, she moved at her own pace, her expression unchanging. To the instructors, she was a box waiting to be checked off the dismissal list. To her squad, she was proof that the system sometimes failed, letting the undeserving slip through. Yet in the shadows of their scorn, Mara carried herself with a precision that few noticed. Her gear was always aligned perfectly, her boots cleaned even in the dust, her bed folded with razor-sharp corners. She never rushed, never panicked, never wasted movement. But these details were invisible to those too busy laughing at her closed eyes. And so the stage was set. Mara Kessler, the invisible failure. She walked the line between ridicule and dismissal, her silence misunderstood, her stillness mistaken for weakness. Yet as history would prove, still waters do not mean absence. Sometimes they hide currents strong enough to reshape the entire river. The rifle range shimmered under the heat, targets lined up in neat rows, silhouettes waiting to be torn apart by well-aimed fire. The command echoed, "Shooters, you have 30 rounds, 10 targets, 3 minutes." Soldiers raised their rifles in unison, bolts clattering, safeties clicked off. The air cracked with the sound of controlled bursts. Brass shells bounced off the ground like rain against tin. Everyone, except Mara Kessler. She raised her rifle with flawless form, sight picture steady, breath controlled. For a heartbeat, it looked as though she would fire. But then, with a calmness that unsettled even the instructors, she lowered it. Her finger never touched the trigger. By the end of the drill, her target stood pristine, untouched paper in a field of shredded silhouettes. Whispers spread down the line. "She didn't fire a single shot. Is she broken?" "Fraud," one soldier laughed under his breath. "Guess her record didn't transfer." Their laughter stung sharper than the desert sun. Mara didn't react. She simply cleared her weapon, walked off the line, and placed it on the rack with the same deliberate calm she carried everywhere. To her squad, it wasn't just failure, it was insult. Dane Coulter shook his head, muttering loudly, "Hope the enemy gives her a nap break." His words earned a ripple of cruel amusement. Mara, as always, offered no defense. The obstacle course came next. 15 obstacles designed to break down even the strongest. Rope climbs, walls, tunnels, and low crawls through sand that found every gap in your uniform. The whistle blew, and soldiers launched forward like runners at the starting gun. Coulter vaulted the wall with practiced ease. Hughes grunted his way through the ropes. Ramirez thundered across the balance beams. Mara reached the same wall, stopped, and looked at it for 3 seconds. Then, instead of climbing, she sat cross-legged in the sand at its base. "Ward, what the hell are you doing?" Hughes shouted, already on the other side. She didn't answer. She closed her eyes, hands resting loosely on her knees, breathing steady as if she were meditating in the middle of chaos. Other squads rushed past. Dirt flew, curses echoed, boots pounded the ground. But Mara remained unmoving, eyes closed, an island of stillness in a storm of exertion. 15 minutes later, when her squad returned drenched in sweat, uniforms soaked with dust and sand, she calmly stood, brushed the dirt from her pants, and jogged to rejoin them as though nothing had happened. Coulter ripped off his helmet, face flushed with rage. "Outstanding! Just outstanding! Hope the enemy waits while you find your Zen garden." The squad chuckled nervously. Mara looked ahead, eyes unreadable. Urban combat simulation was meant to be the ultimate test. A 2-story plywood village, corridors and stairwells, hostages and hostile role players hidden in the shadows. Ammunition replaced with paint rounds that stung like hell, but didn't kill. The objective, clear the building, rescue civilians, neutralize threats. Coulter laid out the plan. Hughes with the ram, Ramirez on his 6, O'Neill covering the rear. "Mara? Try to keep up," he said, dismissing her like equipment he didn't trust. The ram hit the door with a thunderous crack. The squad poured inside. Mara entered last, slipping into a corner, lowering herself against the wall, eyes closed. She breathed evenly while chaos erupted around her. Paint rounds snapped through the air, men shouting, role players screaming. In 30 seconds, Hughes went down with a splatter of blue across his helmet. Ramirez took a shot to the chest. O'Neill froze and caught a round in the shoulder. Coulter, furious and desperate, fought until he was cornered. Within moments, 3/4 of the squad was dead. The hostages remained unsecured. And Mara, still seated, silent, unmoving. When the whistle blew to signal failure, Coulter rounded on her, voice breaking with anger. "We're all dead, Sergeant. Every single one of us. What world is that rear security?" Mara looked up calmly, expression unchanged. Position maintained. Her tone wasn't sarcastic. It was factual, as though she had simply executed an assignment. The instructor stepped in before Coulter exploded further. His expression, however, was just as grim. "Kessler, if this continues, you'll be gone before the week is out. This is your official warning. Show improvement or you're finished." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied evenly. No defensiveness, no protest. Just calm acknowledgement. To her squad, Mara was a failure. Mocked, resented, ridiculed. To the instructors, she was a liability waiting for paperwork. But to anyone who looked closer, there was something strange about her silence. Her gear was always perfectly arranged. Her eyes constantly scanned exits, even while sleeping. Her every movement carried deliberation, as though nothing she did was random. And yet no one saw it. Because in environments like the military, and in life, we equate noise with strength. We praise those who move fast, shout loud, push visibly. Stillness makes people uncomfortable. A soldier who meditates in the dirt while others sweat is branded weak. A professional who doesn't scramble during chaos is called lazy. But sometimes stillness is not weakness. It is control. It is patience. It is the discipline of someone who knows exactly what they are capable of and is waiting for the moment it truly matters. Mara's squad couldn't imagine that her silence was protection, not defiance. That her calm was conditioning, not apathy. They laughed because laughter was easier than curiosity. They mocked because ridicule feels safer than respect. And so they missed the truth staring them in the face. Mara wasn't failing. She was hiding. The mystery was not why she refused to fight during drills, but what she was saving her fight for. The training yard was buzzing with frustration. Instructors had already drafted paperwork for Mara Kessler's dismissal, and her squad treated her like dead weight. Dust swirled in the heat, rifles clattered on racks, and soldiers muttered under their breath about the sleepwalker who refused to fight. That morning, however, something shifted. A matte black SUV rolled into the compound. The engine cut, doors opened, and silence rippled across the yard. Out stepped Commander Adrian Cross. He didn't need an introduction. The way he moved said everything. Late 40s, broad-shouldered, with weathered lines etched deep into his face. His uniform was crisp but understated. No parade ribbons, no unnecessary decorations. Just the essentials. He carried himself like a man who had spent his life in hostile places where movement wasted meant life lost. Soldiers instinctively straightened as he passed. Authority radiated from him like heat. Cross shook hands briefly with the Master Chief, then gestured toward the training grounds. "I'd like to observe one more run." "Sir," the chief said cautiously, "Kessler is scheduled for dismissal. Her performance—" "I've read the reports," Cross interrupted, calm but firm. "I just want to see her run one more scenario." The chief hesitated, searching the commander's face for hidden meaning, then finally nodded. "Yes, sir. We can set up another exercise." The order was given. Squads scrambled into formation. Mara's squad groaned audibly, convinced this was just another humiliation waiting to happen. Coulter muttered under his breath, "Maybe this time she'll stay awake." His men chuckled. Mara herself moved as she always did, steady, calm, without resistance. She fell into position at the rear of the squad, her rifle slung neatly, her gear perfectly aligned. To all appearances, she was the same passive, disengaged soldier they had known for 2 weeks. The scenario was announced, a multi-building clearance with hostages and hostile role players, armed with belt-fed machine guns, pistols, and ambush angles designed to break even seasoned teams. It was meant to separate real operators from trainees. The whistle blew. Hughes charged the first door with the ram, Coulter on his 6, Ramirez close behind. Paint rounds cracked, boots pounded on plywood floors, shouts echoed in the confined corridors. Mara drifted as always to the corner, lowering herself against the wall, eyes closed. And then, across the field, Commander Cross's voice cut through the noise. "Kessler, recall mode, execute." The words were sharp, precise, like a key turning in a lock. Mara's eyes opened instantly. She rose in one fluid motion, rifle snapping to her shoulder. The lethargy vanished. In its place was something terrifyingly efficient. She flowed forward like water, every movement economical, every angle calculated. On the first floor, she cleared rooms in seconds, her muzzle never wavering, transitions so smooth they looked rehearsed by instinct. Corners were sliced clean, hostiles neutralized before they could aim. Her breathing was steady, her posture textbook, but faster, sharper, more instinctive than anything the instructors had ever taught. By the time she reached the stairwell, the rest of her squad had barely recovered from the initial ambush. Two were dead, paint splattered across their helmets. Coulter, still firing blindly, turned just in time to see Mara sweep past him, eyes locked forward, rifle already acquiring her next target. Upstairs, the role players had prepared a complex ambush. Hostiles with paintball rifles crouched behind cover, a hostage tied to a chair in the center, crossfire angles designed to shred any team reckless enough to push in. Most squads needed 15 minutes to puzzle out a way through. Mara didn't pause at the threshold. She read the geometry in a glance, the angles, the backdrop, the hostage's position. Two shots cracked. Two hostiles went down. She pivoted left, dropped another. In seconds, the room was cleared, hostage secured, threats eliminated. The alarm blared, but this time it was not the short, sharp tone of failure. It was the long, clean note of success. The yard fell silent. Soldiers who had mocked her stared with wide eyes. Instructors gaped, clipboards frozen midair. Coulter, still catching his breath, looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice cracking. Mara checked her weapon, made it safe, and only then turned to him. Her words were quiet but devastating. "Same person I've always been. You just never had clearance to see it." The debriefing room smelled faintly of disinfectant and gun oil. Mara sat on one side of the folding table, methodically cleaning her rifle, every piece reassembled with clockwork precision. Across from her sat Commander Cross, the Master Chief, and a stunned instructor. Her file was on the table. Pages of redacted lines, black bars where details should have been, deployments that didn't officially exist, operations never recorded in public logs. A perfect mission record, 0 friendly casualties, 100% extractions. "So why now?" the chief asked. "Why the games? Why sit through 2 weeks of drills like a failure?" Mara paused briefly, then continued cleaning. "It wasn't a game. Conditioning isn't something you switch on or off. It's containment. Like holding back a guard dog. It doesn't bite until it's told to." The room was silent. Cross finally spoke. She did exactly what she was trained to do. Controlled until activated. That's why she's still alive. And that's why we still need her. Within hours, her dismissal papers were torn up, replaced with transfer orders. She was no longer a student. She was to become an instructor, teaching skills most soldiers would never even know existed. What happened on that field wasn't just about Mara. It revealed a truth about elite soldiers and people in general. Special forces live by signals, acting only when the mission or a trusted voice calls. To outsiders, that restraint looks like weakness. In reality, it's control. Mara's calm wasn't laziness. It was a leash. When Cross gave the order, the leash snapped, and the real Mara Kessler emerged. Disciplined, precise, unstoppable. That lesson extends beyond the battlefield. True strength doesn't boast, it waits. And when the moment comes, it strikes with a precision that silences everyone. The debriefing room was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of gun oil and disinfectant. A single fluorescent light hummed above, casting a sterile glow over the metal table. Mara Kessler sat at one end, methodically pushing a cleaning patch through the barrel of her rifle. Each motion was precise, deliberate, unhurried. Across from her sat Commander Adrian Cross, the Master Chief, and one instructor who had spent the last 2 weeks trying and failing to make sense of her. On the table lay her personnel file, its pages riddled with black ink redactions. Deployment dates erased. Unit designations struck through. Entire paragraphs covered by thick black bars. To anyone else, it looked like a blank record. To Cross, it spoke volumes. Finally, the instructor leaned forward. His voice carried equal parts frustration and curiosity. Sergeant Kessler, what was that? For 2 weeks you've been a ghost, and then, he gestured helplessly. That, who exactly are you? Mara set the rifle aside and folded her hands calmly on the table. For a moment she said nothing. Silence stretched so long the instructor shifted uncomfortably. Then she spoke, her tone measured, almost detached. I'm exactly who I said I was. A soldier. Nothing more, nothing less. The instructor scoffed. Soldiers don't sit cross-legged during drills. They don't let their squad fail. You were playing a game. Not a game, she interrupted quietly, her eyes dark and unwavering, fixed on him. Protocol. Cross nodded slightly as though he had been waiting for the word. Condition protocol, he clarified. Mara inclined her head in agreement. That's right. I was trained in a unit that doesn't officially exist. Missions never recorded. Operations you'll never see on paper. In that world, discipline isn't about how fast you shoot or how loud you yell. It's about control. We were conditioned to stay dormant until activated. No improvisation, no deviation. We acted only when given the signal. Her words hung in the air, like the weight of classified steel. Conditioned, the instructor repeated, trying to process it. Mara leaned forward slightly. Think of it like this. A guard dog on a leash. It doesn't bark. It doesn't bite. It looks harmless, maybe even lazy. But the second you give it the command, it moves with lethal intent. That was my role. To remain still until told otherwise. 2 weeks of silence wasn't neglect, it was obedience. The room fell silent. The Master Chief's face softened with a trace of realization. He had been watching her closely from the beginning, sensing there was something deeper. Now the truth crystallized. Cross folded his hands. You see why I intervened? He said to the others. She wasn't failing. She was following conditioning none of you were cleared to understand. The instructor frowned. But why keep her here? Why not deprogram her before sending her into standard training? Mara's eyes darkened, and for the first time her composure wavered. Just slightly. Because some things can't be undone. You don't just flip a switch and walk away from a world like that. My leash was designed to stay on until someone with the right authority said otherwise. Without that, I stay silent. That's how we survive. That's how we don't break. Cross nodded again, his expression grave. And that's why she is alive when so many others aren't. What Mara revealed was more than a military secret. It was a moral dilemma. She wasn't a failed soldier playing at incompetence. She was a weapon, carefully leashed, designed to act only at the right moment. Her stillness was not weakness. It was engineered restraint. And yet, what does it mean for a nation to create people like this? To strip them of choice so completely that their strength only emerges when triggered by a code or an order? It raises questions larger than Mara herself. Should humans be conditioned to bury their own instincts until someone else permits their release? Should someone with such skill be forced to live invisible, mocked as useless, just to keep a protocol intact? These are not just military questions. They are human ones. How much of ourselves are we allowed to hide, or are forced to hide, because the world isn't ready to see us? Mara's story forces us to face hard truths. Her discipline was extraordinary, enduring ridicule and even the threat of dismissal, yet staying silent because protocol demanded it. That kind of restraint can save lives. The sniper who waits, the pilot who holds, the soldier who moves only at the signal. But it was also tragedy. For 2 weeks she was scorned, not for lack of skill, but because she was forbidden to show it. The system that made her powerful also left her misunderstood, trapped in secrecy. So the question lingers. Should warriors like Mara live as shadows, their humanity locked away for the mission? Perhaps this is the price of extraordinary operators. Secrecy as both armor and curse. Mara finished reassembling her rifle. Each piece clicked into place with the assurance of long practice. She looked up at the men across the table, her expression calm, resolute. You want to know who I am, she said quietly. I'm the same person I've always been. The difference is, now you're allowed to see it. Cross leaned back in his chair. And that's all the explanation we need. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Everyone in the room understood one thing. Mara Kessler was not a failure. She was a secret, and secrets like her were never meant to be judged by ordinary standards. The paperwork moved faster than anyone expected. Just 24 hours earlier, Mara Kessler's name had been on a dismissal list. Now the ink on that order was shredded, replaced with a transfer memo stamped in red, "Instructor assignment, effective immediately." When the squad heard the news, disbelief rippled through the barracks. Hughes muttered, "She was supposed to be gone." Ramirez shook his head, staring at the floor. O'Neill, usually the joker, was silent, and Dane Coulter, the loudest critic, said nothing at all. At chow, Mara entered as she always had, tray in hand, quiet steps, eyes scanning exits without seeming to. But the room was different. The mocking laughter that once followed her was gone. Conversations hushed as she passed. Soldiers who used to smirk now straightened unconsciously. Even Coulter, seated at his usual table, lowered his gaze. Respect doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up in silence. The official announcement came the next morning. Commander Adrian Cross stood before the assembled trainees, his presence enough to quiet the restless crowd. "Effective today," he declared, "Staff Sergeant Mara Kessler will not continue as a student. She will serve instead as a special instructor, attached directly to this program." A murmur ran through the ranks. Cross raised a hand, cutting it off. "For those of you who doubt, you saw what she did. You know why this decision was made. She isn't here to prove herself to you. She's here so you can learn from someone who understands what real discipline looks like." Mara stood at his side, expression calm, unreadable as ever. She didn't bask in the moment, didn't smile at her vindication. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact she had already known. For Dane Coulter's squad, the transformation in their own behavior was undeniable. They still remembered the drills where Mara sat cross-legged, eyes closed while they sweated and cursed. They remembered mocking her, laughing at her silence, ridiculing her as a fraud. And now those memories burned with shame. When training resumed, none of them dared call her sleepwalker. They spoke to her with clipped courtesy, using her rank with precision. Coulter avoided her eyes, but when forced to interact, his tone carried something new. Deference. Mara, for her part, never rubbed their noses in their mistakes. She didn't remind them of their insults. She didn't demand apologies. She instructed with the same calm discipline she had shown all along. To her, their contempt had never mattered. Her mission was bigger than their opinions, and that, more than anything, earned their respect. Mara's transfer is more than a story about military bureaucracy. It's a lesson about silence, patience, and hidden strength. In a world obsessed with noise, where the loudest voices are often mistaken for the wisest, Mara proved the opposite. She showed that silence can be more powerful than shouting, that patience can outlast mockery, and that real strength doesn't always need to be performed. For 2 weeks, she endured ridicule, staying faithful to a protocol none of them could understand. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was discipline. Her restraint wasn't weakness, it was control. And when the signal came, she revealed a truth no one could ignore. Too often, we underestimate the quiet ones, the colleague who never interrupts, the student who doesn't raise her hand, the soldier who doesn't fight for the spotlight. We label them as weak, disengaged, or unworthy. Yet history shows us that many of the most decisive actions come from those who wait, watch, and act only when the time is right. Mara embodied that principle, and in doing so, she forced everyone around her to rethink what strength really looks like. After the transfer, the base returned to its rhythm. Drills continued. Soldiers marched. Orders echoed across the yard. But those who had witnessed Mara's transformation carried a different awareness. They had seen what silence could hide. They had learned that strength doesn't always wear a uniform loudly. Late at night, as Coulter's squad sat in their bunks, the unspoken thought haunted them. How many times had they laughed at her, blind to the truth? How many times had they dismissed someone because they didn't fit the mold? And if Mara Kessler had been hiding in plain sight, how many others were out there, waiting, silent, unseen, carrying stories, skills, and scars that the world might never recognize until the moment demanded it? Mara herself never answered those questions. She simply carried her duffel bag to her new quarters, the stripes of an instructor pinned to her chest. As she passed her old squad, she gave them the same calm nod she always had. Nothing more, nothing less. It was enough. Mara Kessler's story doesn't just belong to the battlefield, it belongs to us. It forces us to ask, in our own lives, how often do we dismiss the quiet ones? The coworker who doesn't raise their voice in meetings, the neighbor who keeps to themselves, the older veteran who sits silently at the coffee shop, carrying memories we'll never know. In American culture, where speaking up and standing out are celebrated, silence is often misread as weakness. But Mara reminds us that silence can be strength, measured, patient, deliberate. Think about our workplaces today. So often, the loudest voice in the room wins the argument. Yet how many times has wisdom come from the person who said little, but spoke at the exact right moment? Think about families. How often do grandparents sit quietly, listening, only to offer a few words that cut straight to the truth? Real strength doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it waits. And when the moment comes, it changes everything. Mara's story also raises questions worth debating. Should a society ask its best people to live in silence, their talents hidden until called upon? Or should we find ways to honor them openly, without waiting for crisis to reveal their worth? That is not just a military dilemma, it is a human one. And it's a question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So I'll ask you directly, do you believe silence is undervalued in today's world? Have you ever known someone underestimated, only for their true strength to surprise everyone? Drop your experiences in the comments. I read each one. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it resonated with you, if it made you reflect, please give this video a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe. Stories like Mara's aren't just about the past. They're about reminding us at any age that hidden strength surrounds us. Sometimes all it takes is one signal for it to shine.